As part of a grassroots effort created by Guardian Spouses to help build community and connection, we bring you our March 10th, 2024 candid conversation with our guest, Sarah Streyder, Executive Director and founder of Secure Families Initiative.
Hey everyone! I know lots of people on this call, so it's good to be in a happy, friendly space. Like Amy said, executive director and founder of Secure Families. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit that helps other military partners and loved ones. Whether you're a TRICARE dependent or not, we want to help you vote and be civically engaged because it's really important to do so. This is very a good pairing, Amy and Sheila, because we kind of go hand in hand with wanting to empower collective voices to raise our voices together, not just on quality of life, but SFI also does advocacy on some other big issues that still impact every one of us, like foreign policy, national security, that sort of thing. I am the spouse of an active duty Space Force Guardian, go enlisted spouses, woohoo, stationed at Osan Air Base here in South Korea. And I just want to say thank you to my fellow South Korean stationed friends who are in the audience today. It means a lot to have local names and local people. And I, of course, know Amy and Sheila and Carolee through the Military Spouse of the Year program in 2022. I was the AFI Space Force and overall Military Spouse of the Year. That is me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that introduction, Sarah. So I'm going to start things off with what seems to be a simple question, but I think a lot of military spouses find themselves asking this. Why should I vote? And the bigger part of where should I be voting?
Well, we are going to split these up because these are both big questions with lots of answers, Sheila. So let me start by why I think you, me, all of us should care about voting. And it's because no matter where you live, I promise you that the outcome of elections that are happening are impacting you and will continue to do so. And I will start with myself as an example. I am stationed overseas in South Korea. I'm about as far away from my home state of Washington state as the military can bother to send me, other than maybe South Africa. And my husband's unit cannot afford to buy itself toilet paper right now. And the reason they can't buy themselves toilet paper is because Congress hasn't passed a budget in more than 15 months. So even though I am really, really far away from the elections that are happening, those elections elect lawmakers who have the power to decide if we have a functioning government, if we have new spending items. By the way, the explanation here is just without a new budget, you can't create new budget items. And so the Space Force took over a unit that the Army has been running. And so the Space Force runs the unit now, but the Army is the only one that has that authorization to spend money on the unit. So every time my husband's unit runs out of toilet paper, they literally have to walk across the hall and beg the Army to please buy them toilet paper. It's pretty ridiculous, right? Anyway, editorializing aside, it just shows and demonstrates the impact that elections have no matter where you are. So even if you feel far away from the action, the functions of DC, or in some cases the dysfunction, I promise, are touching you in ways you may or may not realize. And then I'll also just add, I think there was this great presentation about all of these issues that we as military spouses have talked about for a while that impact us, whether that's employment, healthcare, housing, childcare, etc. My guess is every single person in this Zoom chat today and watching the replay later has an issue above all other issues that you care a lot about, that there's something in this world that you really want to change, or think maybe this could just be, I don't know, a little bit easier, either for me or for someone I love. And I can guarantee you that voting is a powerful tool to taking steps toward making that change, because sometimes we're talking to lawmakers, asking them to make change, and sometimes you got to change the lawmakers to get that change. And if you ever want help drawing the map of I care about issue X and I want to figure out which election Y is connected to this issue, call me, email me. I'll be your personal politics map. I'll show you if it's your school board or your governor or your member of Congress, because all of these things tie back to the stuff that we vote on.
Perfect. Thank you. So I know where I vote, but I think it can be a little bit of a cloudy subject, right? For a lot of military spouses, especially those that entered military spousedom right out of college or right out of high school, that they may not actually know where they should be voting. Should you be voting in your home of record? Should you be voting where you currently live? Can you explain a little bit about how to determine that and the implications?
Absolutely. So your voting address, it is often recommended, should be your state of residency. Now, this is a very specific term. It's different from home of record. And so this is wherever you declare residency in this current moment. That could be you are a resident of the state you are currently live in, or you're a residency of a state that you call home no matter where else the military sends you. So if you're a service member, your state of residency is the state address that's on your LES, your leave and earnings statement. If you're an employed civilian spouse, it's going to be on your W-2 tax form. It's whatever the state is that's getting your state taxes out of your income. That's your state of residency. Now, of course, if you're not a service member and if you don't have formal employment, these aren't helpful. Where do I find my residency? Technically, it's a choice. And this goes for those of us who choose what to put on our W-2. As a military spouse, you can make a choice to change your residency every time you PCS to a new location, because what's most important to you is that you build strong local ties and you're willing to both pay taxes and vote in that local community. Some of us keep a state of residency our whole career, and sometimes it happens to be that original home of record we originally enlisted or from. That's my case. I'm a Washington State resident. That's where Jason rose his hand, and we've stuck with that ever since. And then, of course, you can change anytime along the way. So again, I just want to make very clear, it's not your home of record. It can be the same, but they're different terms and they mean different things. And sometimes it's the same places where you might have your driver's license or other identification card, but not necessarily. That's a good shorthand for civilians, but not necessarily military voters, because sometimes we get local IDs. Like my latest driver's license is from Virginia. So that's where I PCS from. But I'm not a Virginia resident. I just needed a local driver's license. So those are two tools.
Now, what about whether a vote is counted or not? There is some question. Sometimes people say, especially for military members serving overseas, that their votes only get counted in particular occasions. Can you explain how you might even find that information out?
So this is a common myth that I'm happy and enthusiastic to dispel, Sheila. Absentee ballots, so these are ballots that are cast from really far away, always get counted. If they arrive on time, if they arrive by the deadline, as long as you've got whatever identification requirements your state might require, like signature matching, that sort of thing. As long as an eligible absentee ballot arrives, it will always end up in the final certified count for that election. I think some of this confusion comes, and we all kind of got more wonky about this in 2020 when all of us were hyper fixated, right, on this counting and elections process. Sometimes what happens is news agencies will project who they think or who they have confidence is going to win a race, even if ballots are still being counted. And so there's a perception sometimes that, well, how are they calling this race and my ballot hasn't even gotten there yet? It's not going to get there for a couple of days. Does that mean my ballot didn't get counted? These are separate things. The official election results of what finally gets counted will absolutely include your absentee ballot as long as it was eligible, and that's different from projections. Now, Sheila, do you mind if I be cheeky for just 1 second? So,
Please do.
yes, every single ballot cast, as long as it's eligible, whether that's in person or long distance, does get counted. But I'm going to say something controversial, which is that your individual vote, no matter how you cast it, isn't going to make a difference. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's not going to make a numeric difference in the outcome of an election. And I just think when lots of people do like get out the vote stuff, they try and say every ballot counts, every vote matters. I don't know, kind of, not really though, right? Like whether or not you vote, Sheila, is not going to impact who is the next commander in chief. But I'm going to tell you why voting still matters. And it is not that your vote might make a difference, although in a handful of situations it has. It's because voting in November is what opens up the door to you to have a meaningful conversation with your elected official in January. So what happens when you're an elected official, you care about serving your constituents. And the definition of constituent is the people that you are accountable to next time you have to run for office. Elected officials pay most attention to people who have consistent personal voting records or represent a group that they know has consistent voting records in general. So when you knock on the door of, let's say, Congressman Bacon, that was brought up in the last presentation, quality of life panel, really excited to see where that goes. I used to live in Nebraska. And so if I go up to Congressman Bacon's office and I say, hey, Congressman Bacon, I hear you're working on military family of life, quality of life issues. I think that you should really prioritize subsidized childcare within the community. Aiken's office is going to be like, who the heck is this person? Why should I give them the time of day? But if they can cross-reference my name to a voter registration roll, and if they can see, oh, this is someone who not only does she show up every election year, but she votes in primaries, she votes in general, she votes every time. Well, shoot, we better listen to what this person's going to say because I want to earn her vote when she shows up. If I knock on that same door and they look at my name and there's no voter file, or maybe I'm registered, but I've not voted a few times, they're not going to care as much about what I say because I may not even show up. So my vote might not be something that they have to earn. Now that's like a really specific case. And maybe you're not someone who has a lot of time to do direct personal advocacy. And so maybe this doesn't interest you. Even if you do not ever once call your member of Congress or write a letter to your school board member or any of that, simply by voting, you make the demographics of your district permanently look more and more like you, whatever that is. And let me tell you a story. When I was stationed in Nebraska, I was the campaign manager for a state Senate candidate. And when we looked at the average age of adults who lived in our district, the average age was 35. So if I'm talking to 35-year-old voters on average, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about childcare. I'm going to talk about career professional issues. And I'm going to probably invest a lot in digital outreach, right? Doing those targeted Instagram ads and Facebook stuff. But then what we did is we looked at the average age of people who vote in our district. And that average age jumped 20 years, 55 years old. All of a sudden, our entire campaign strategy changed. We started talking about senior care issues over childcare issues. We started investing in those physical things you send in the mail to talk about a candidate rather than digital advertisements. We changed our whole strategy. And I think that demonstrates the power of, even if you, Amy Selix, vote, but again, you never touch advocacy past that. You are, every time you cast a ballot and you're building that voting record, you're making your district probably younger, more female, more your background, which is naturally going to lead to elected officials caring, and people who run for office caring more about issues that matter to you.
We do have a question in the chat. It's a little bit more specific, so I'm going to try to broaden it a little bit. But when moving, their ability to vote was removed. Is there anything that, if you still have an ID in that area, can they actually remove you from that area's voting abilities?
And Kelly, I'm going to invite you to hop off mute if I start to answer the question and it's like I'm talking about the wrong thing, interrupt me and make sure I'm answering the right thing. So here's what I know happens a lot, and unfortunately with increasing frequency. There are these things called voter roll purges, where the person at the state level who kind of manages the registration files for everyone registered to vote will sometimes just toss out people's registration. And sometimes it's for really data-driven reasons, like they cross-references it with death certificates, and so they tossed out the voter registration of people who have deceased. That makes sense, right? That's good kind of data management and hygiene. But other times they do that and sometimes it is, oh, you've not voted in the last 4 elections. We're going to make assumptions about that. We're going to assume you moved away. We're going to assume you died. We're going to assume you're not interested anymore. We're going to toss out your voter registration. And I am not a fan of that, as you can probably tell from my tone of voice. I do not think that's appropriate, especially for military voters who, gosh, if that means I fail 4 times to vote, even if I try, because I'm stationed in South Korea, you're going to make assumptions about my civic participation. Keep your mitts off my voter registration. Anyway, they don't always listen to me though. So anyway, this does happen is what I'm trying to get at, Kelly. And I don't know if it was you were the victim of a voter registration roll purge moment. Oh, go for it. Hi, Kelly.
It was actually ahead of the last presidential election, or I think it was, I don't know, whatever it was. There was an election that year, and it was one of the ones where Ohio was going to be swing. And I figured it was because they realized, oh, there's been turnover because we did a change of mailing address. Although I still had my Ohio current valid driver's license, and I had been planning to keep it as an Ohio, so I could vote in the swing state. So it was just a very odd thing, and I was wondering if there's, for spouses, can they do that, and what is your recourse? Because, for instance, right now we're registered in Virginia, where we own a home, but I actually have to check where we're residents, and I'm afraid of that for there.
Yeah, if so, in a personal, on a one-on-one basis, if this happens to you, So you can re-register very quickly, and you can always like add a note that explains like, hey, I'm a military voter. And I'm going to get to this later in the presentation, but especially if you use this military specific voter registration form, it's called the federal postcard application. It automatically flags you as military, and often will get like, oh my gosh, of course, yes, please. They just recognize the lifestyle that way. You can also, if you're having trouble, like say you go to cast a ballot and they're like, oh, you're not on the registration rolls, you can always cast what's called a provisional ballot, and then you can figure out the registration confusion later with your election official. So if you're in person, it's called a provisional ballot. If you're voting by mail or electronically, there's something called the Federal Right-to-In Absentee Ballot, or the FWAB, because the government is great at naming things. And this is a blank ballot that anyone can fill out really at any time before an election to say, hey, my official ballot hasn't gotten here, or I'm worried it's not going to get there in time. So I'm going to fill in this absentee provisional ballot. You get something in by the deadline, you make sure your voice counts, and then you, like I said, work on the registration later. I mean, ultimately, if your state is pulling real shenanigans, you can always sue them. And that might sound scary and like, oh, talk to me about it, I'll sue them for you. And I'm being cheeky on purpose, but like there are legit organizations that like look out for civil rights. And so you don't have to do any of the legal stuff. You can just like raise your hand and say, I'm a plaintiff. They got rid of my registration erroneously. Please help me fix it. So like there are multiple forms of recourse, and you have support.
Any other questions for Miss Sarah?
I have one. Sarah, it's so nice to see you. Can you talk about how personal advocacy differs for service members versus military spouses?
Absolutely. I will just flag, I'm not a service member, nor am I an expert on DoD 1344.10, though I know which directive it is. So I don't want to be giving advice to someone who is a service member about their rules. What I'm very confident in, though, is what the military spouse rules are or are not, and therefore can kind of compare and contrast, if that's okay. So guess what? If you are a civilian dependent and you are not yourself a service member, nor have you ever, you have signed no dotted line anywhere that has said you have given up any of your First Amendment rights to speech, to advocacy. So there are no rules, including DoD 1344.10, that apply to you. They only apply to your service member. Now, there are some things that I, Sarah Streyder, could do that could accidentally give the impression that the speech that I am giving is coming from my husband, Jason. Funny that both the guest speakers have husbands named Jason today, and not Sarah. Here's one example. Let's say we're one of those people that has a shared Facebook account, like it's the Sarah and Jason Streyder Facebook page, or a shared email account, StreyderFamilyForever.org, whatever. If I send an email or if I post on that Facebook page and I say something that my service member isn't supposed to say, but I'm saying it, but it's from a joint account, do you see how that would create confusion? It would set my service member up for at risk of being like, hey, you violated the rule. What might one of those rules be? Well, guess what? Service members are allowed to obviously vote. They can also volunteer for campaigns, so they can encourage other people, hey, you should vote for this person, as long as they're out of uniform, they're doing it in their personal capacity, all that stuff. Service members are even allowed to donate to political campaigns. Pretty cool, right? The only thing they can't do is that they can't solicit donations from other people for a campaign, even in their personal capacity, even out of uniform. So Jason cannot say, hey, you should donate to so-and-so running for Congress because I think they're going to be great for the military. I can do that. I can solicit donations, but again, I got to make sure I'm not doing it from a joint account that would accidentally make it look like Jason's saying it. There are a bunch of other rules, like if you live on base, you can't have any yard signs on your house. And that goes for service member, anyone living in the house, of course. If you're off base, doesn't have that rule though. Yard sign away. If you have a car that you're going to be driving on base, whether you're the service member or someone else, you can't have more than a bumper sticker on your car. So no flags that say so-and-so 2024, shucks. But really, all of these rules are so minor compared to what I think a lot of us thought there were. So I hope that answers your question, and I'm happy to have more granular feedback or follow-up if you've got more questions.
That was perfect. Thank you, Sarah.
Of course. Then Sheila, can I go ahead and talk about the voter registration forms real quick so that I can use acronyms from here on out with
Yes,
having
please.
them defined?
Yes.
Okay. So Sheila asked earlier, where the hell am I supposed to vote? Which address of the 20,000 I have some connection to is my voting residence? And I answered state of residency. Sometimes we live in the state of residency that we have, right? Total coincidence. So if we ever get stationed in Spokane, I'm back in my residency. If that happens to be true for you, you are a local voter, and there is nothing about the registration process or the ballot casting process that is different for you because of the military than any other civilian voting in that jurisdiction. So again, if I live in Spokane, I have to use the Spokane County registration form to register, or maybe it's the state of Washington registration form. I have the same rights as my civilian neighbor. So whatever early voting is accessible, whatever in-person polling places are available to me, that's how I'm going to vote. It is only when you are far away from your voting address. And frankly, far away can be the other end of the state. If we ever get stationed in Seattle, I am still far away from Spokane, relatively speaking, which means that I am what's called an absentee voter, or a long distance voter is what I like to call it. If you're an absentee or a long distance voter, and it's because you're connected to the military, so you're a service member or you're a dependent, teenager, spouse, whatever, you should be using the federal postcard application, or FPCA, for anything that you need. You should use that to register for the very first time. You should use that same form anytime you're keeping your same registration, but you have to update your mailing address. You got to make sure that your ballot shows up in Virginia, not Alaska. If your name changes or any other details about you change, use the same FPCA just to update your registration file. And then every year you're going to vote, even if nothing has changed. That's how you flag that, like, hey, I'm going to need an absentee ballot, so I'm not going to be voting in person because I'm stationed in South Korea. So the FPCA is the special form for when you're a long distance voter for reasons of the military. And it comes with a bunch of perks. Not only is it this one-stop shop, which is awesome for all of us, no matter what state we vote in, but it gives you the right to receive that absentee ballot at least 45 days before the election. So if you're doing some math, an early November election, you get your ballot in mid-September, which gives you so much time to research how you want to vote, cast that ballot, and send it back as soon as possible to make sure it arrives on time. It also lets you, and this is something that I like, but I recognize not everyone has access to a printer, so it's a bit of a privilege, but you can get your blank ballot emailed to you. So you don't have to wait for it to arrive in the mail first, and then you send it back by mail. On that 45-day mark, you immediately get an email from your county election official. And as long as you can print it out, sign it, and stick it in the mail, you can vote maximally early that way. And these are all rights that you have by being an absentee military voter, which they can tell because you've used the FPCA. Pretty cool, huh? Well, the first thing I want to put is on our SFI website, we've got a vote page that is itself a one-stop shop for answering questions about how you figure out your residency, if you're local or long distance, and then it links to the proper registration forms once you get that. So I love this tool. We're really proud of it. The little Quizlet that kind of is toward the bottom. Feel free to use it if you need it, and then share it with others who are in your military network. This is going to be like the best, most user-friendly, more so than a government website, way to answer questions about voting. If you're someone who maybe is already an avid voter and you're kind of looking for that next step, or maybe you're new to voting, but you're still really passionate about it, want to help folks, we have a voting ambassador program this year. So we're basically recruiting other military partners and loved ones who want to help get out the vote in their local community. And that could be your local geographic community, like you want to do stuff with spouses at your base, or it could be your digital community. We have kind of virtual get out the vote resources too. Follow us on the socials if you're able, because we're going to be doing a lot of get out the vote information and reminders that are fun, and they can do stuff like explain how different levels of election affect military life. So I've stuck our Facebook and Instagram handles. We're also on TikTok. So if you're on that platform, you will see me doing many a TikTok here and there. And then if you're interested in broader what we do at SFI, you can join a monthly member call. That's the best way to get a sense of what it is that we're up to lately.